Thank you so much, Walter, and so great to be here today to talk about one of my favorite topics. And before we dig into some specific examples from Ontario health teams, we thought it was important to review some co-design fundamentals. And whether or not you're new to co-design or have been doing this for a long time, it's really great to sort of revisit these fundamental principles so you can be really intentional about the co-design work that you're doing with your partners. So we'll hit on what is co-design because there's so many definitions out there. And then we'll look at why it matters. And then I'll pull through a couple of practical examples of my own. So when we look at a recent paper by Thurborn, they define co-design kind of in these three buckets. So co-design is a process for developing solutions to typically complex problems where you need to get, a number of different collaborators together to dig into something to try to make something work better or design something like an intervention. It privileges lived expertise. So ideally, whatever you're working on, you're going to work with people that are directly impacted by that problem that you're trying to solve for, in addition to people that have that power and interest in making a change, that are able to implement what you're designing. And it also represents a shift from consulting with partners to more equitable decision making. So it's kind of, if you think of a continuum of engagement, you're moving from sort of asking people questions, getting feedback, doing surveys, et cetera, to actually coming together as a group to think through and solve problems together. And to break it down even more simply, we can look at Sanders' work from 2002. They talk about three approaches to interacting with people. So they say, do, and make. So say is about listening to what people have to say. Do is watching how people might use products or services. And make is where sort of co-design fits a bit more concretely. It's about coming together in creative workshops and discussions to explore things and make solutions. And of course, all of these things kind of combine together when you're doing co-design work, but it's another framework to help situate what we're doing in the different degrees of engagement. So we can also look at co-design as a form of engagement. And of course, there's a continuum of engagement where you go from consultative practices to more kind of embedded and closer work together, decision-making, et cetera. And looking at Paula Rowland and Jennifer Johansson, they have a chapter in a book on that was edited by Brian Hodges on compassionate care. And I really like how they talk about engagement as framed in different ways. So engagement can be framed in an instrumental nature. And this is typically how we think about engagement. It's action focused, it's committee work, doing co-design activities, where we're really striving for a tangible product or a tangible outcome or something new or a redesign of something. But engagement is also importantly framed in a democratic form. And so presumably when we come together with the community, we will agree that they have a right to influence healthcare. So the democratic piece is another driving force. And we could also think of engagement in a narrative form, where it's about learning, unlearning, relearning, sharing, and coming together. So in terms of co-design, you could see that all of these things kind of come into play. So the instrumental part of co-design is the activity that we do. The democratic part of co-design is honoring that when we come together, we believe that people have a right to influence their healthcare and to shape what that looks like. And also that we engage in narrative forms of learning together and challenging our assumptions as we work together. And just to put the phases of the work together in a very simple form, what I like to revisit and share when I do these types of presentations is really reinforcing that co-design isn't just bringing anyone who's available together, although sometimes if we have a short timeline, we might rely on sort of the partners we usually connect with, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's really important that we're going to be working with people that are actually affected by the problem that we're seeking to fix. So we'll hear from a group focusing on palliative care in Mississauga. And so, working with people that have had an experience in that space will be critical. But also, in an institutional setting, we know that there is power differences in terms of implementation power. So we'll have to, it's important to ensure when you do co-design activities that you're working with people that are invested in implementing what you're co-designing and keeping that in mind as you do your work. The first phase, which is sometimes neglected and skipped over or done a bit too quickly, is the relationship building phase. To really get to know the community you're working with, learn what they're interested in, what their priorities are, and also what they need to effectively participate in the work that you're doing. There's obviously the activity phase of the work we're doing together. It might be a workshop or a world cafe or a journey map that we're creating together. That's considered the activity phase. And the other piece that is sometimes neglected or not focused on enough is the looping back and the ongoing engagement phase. So when you finish your co-design activity, it's about looping back with the group that you've engaged with to talk about how their ideas were taken up or maybe not taken up and why, or what pieces of their feedback were used or not used. And also continuing to build the relationship. And there's likely work that you continue to do together as you evolve the intervention or process improvement that you've been working on. In a true learning health system, you're always kind of in that loop of evolving and improving over time. And so that co-design and engagement is a little bit more fluid throughout that process as you continue to work together to evolve and improve the services that you have. I pulled this from a recent paper from KISS and colleagues and made just a few adaptations. This more fully fleshes out all the stages of co-design. What I showed you in the last slide was just a simplification of this, which fleshes out the steps a bit more. So it starts with engage. So again, building relationships and taking time to understand the problem from the perspective of the community that you're working with, planning the work together. So the stages of work, the logistics of the activities, the methods you're going to use, the goals that you have to make sure that everyone's roughly on the same page going forward. And then you explore, so you dig deeper into learning about people's experiences and setting priority areas. So this might be done kind of in advance of a co-design activity where you're doing some additional engagement or interviews or working groups. And then you move into the development stage where you're actually creating, maybe it's a process improvement, or you're taking something that exists and you're working with your partners to tweak it and with your community to make it better. And then there's a process of narrowing things down and deciding how to refine it and focus it. And then, of course, ideally, you turn those ideas into action, and that could take some time. And as the system changes around us and the complexity of the system is always there, it's important to be very nimble in how we're situating the work that we're doing. And so this is a really good piece by Sendra. It's just recently hot off the press, and they get into the ethics of co-design. And this is based on participatory action research projects that were conducted in the UK, in addition to a literature review, where they took the 6 principles of fair consultation that are used in the UK and fleshed it out further into 10 co-design principles that we can think about as we do our work. And I think this list is always good to go back and revisit as you're engaging with your communities. So first and foremost, we have to apply collective thinking. So going from thinking as separate individuals to thinking as a group. Of course, we have diverse perspectives, but really thinking about, are we all driving in the same direction? Are we really working together as a collective community to solve the problems that we see in front of us? There's the creation of partnerships where you're taking the time to connect with people and find participants and partners for the work, knowing the population and the context that you're working in. So knowing any histories of the population, any structural marginalization that they may have or continue to experience, and knowing sort of who are the people that are really impacted by the problem that you're seeking to solve for, and getting to know, taking the time to get to know that population. And that will help you address power imbalances. So when you're initially connecting with the population you're going to be working with, knowing how do they want to engage, what will make them feel most comfortable, what do they need to do to prepare, and also to the research team, other system partners, what do they need to do to prepare to create an enabling space so everyone can participate. So there's a bit of work, especially if you're new to co-design, to dig into to get to know how to create spaces for people to share ideas. Empowering people to participate. So there might be some skill building for all types of partners to get some awareness on how to do this work. Using inclusive events and language, or having inclusive events and using inclusive language. Thinking about where you're going with the work. So do some people stand to benefit while others will lose out? And it's really important to apply equity principles. So how can we all benefit from the work we're doing? Timing and resources, and also starting before decisions are made. Sometimes we might consult people after we're kind of pretty far along in the project. So ideally, we're building our communities to work with, so they're involved in the decisions along the way in the co-design process. And another set of 4 questions, which might be helpful as we ready ourselves, as well as our organizations, to do co-design work, is to really think thoughtfully about the positions that you hold and how that might impact others. How you make others feel, and trying to pay attention to body language and how people are receiving the energy that we bring into these spaces. Asking, am I creating a safe space? And what do you need to do to create that safe space? And also, is the organization or the context we're working in ready to make the change that we want to achieve? And of course, there's some more tactical pieces you can do to really think about, how you can create a safe space for others. And one really important piece is knowing knowing the backgrounds of individuals that are coming to the group and the resources that they need to prepare for that co-design activity that you're doing or the ongoing engagement. And also making sure that you're providing space for people to contribute in various ways. Long pauses between questions, giving people time to reflect, and then sharing, maybe writing down responses, sharing openly the responses. And if it's on Zoom, the chat function is helpful. Maybe providing space after a meeting for ongoing reflection, and offering one-on-one opportunities to connect further with people, particularly for those that might want some extra time to digest what's happening and provide feedback after. So those are ways to create some safety within the spaces that you're working in. And why does it matter? Looking at the work by Steen on the benefits of co-design, and this is coming more from like the service design literature. So you'll see like the verbiage is a bit different, the use of the term customers and users, but we can think about patients, families, communities. Benefits are for the project. When we're engaging with our communities to design our project, we're going to have different viewpoints informing the work to make it ideally more inclusive. It will be a more creative process. We'll be able to figure out what definitions to use, how to describe things, so it's a little bit more of an enabling context. And also there's benefits for people that are going to be using the thing that's co-designed. Ideally, there's going to be a better fit between the service and people's needs and the actual experience. We're going to close that gap. And also the organization. By doing co-design work, you're creating spaces for innovation. You're training people how to think differently, how to work with partners, how to challenge their biases. So just the sole purpose sometimes of co-design, or one of the key purposes, is really to learn how to work together. Ideally, you're going somewhere with this work, but a key benefit is learning how to work with different partners and think differently than the status quo. And also it helps us to move from technical to adaptive solutions. So on the left here, there's a differentiation between challenges that are technical in nature and then challenges that are adaptive. Technical challenges have like a pretty clear-cut solution. So say, for example, you have a simple hip fracture, there's a protocol that you follow, the surgeon is in place, you have a whole pathway that's lined up and you're ready to go. When it comes to an adaptive challenge, there's no clear answer to the problem that you're looking at, and it requires lots of perspectives. It requires maybe working across organizations. And so we can think about co-design work as being like an adaptive challenge and an adaptive, we have to work on our adaptive capacity to work together to solve these challenges. And also co-design is a vehicle for collective impact, which ultimately the OHTs and the system is trying to achieve. It's an intentional way of working together to solve complex problems. And also we can't do this as single individuals or single organizations. It requires coming together across different people and organizations and communities to really create some meaningful change. So again, very quickly, I'll probably just walk through one of these examples, is to talk a bit about my own personal experience in two research projects, which has very different outcomes. One still in progress, but I've had a chance to reflect on what made it work and maybe why did things go in a different direction than expected. The first one is about addressing hallway medicine, and then there's a patient experience strategy that we're working on. So this will look familiar. This is the Learning Health System framework that Walter has been showing across the HSPN webinars, and at the beginning of today's session, is that, well, in our ALC study that we did with patients, caregivers, communities, and providers, we started with looking at the population. So if you click the first click, this will come up. I love this slide. This is my fancy innovation for you here. We looked at local and provincial data on alternate level of care patients to learn about their characteristics. We did some interviews to learn about their experiences, learning that it's a difficult time. It's a confusing time for patients and families and for providers, and there's lots of room for improvement in this care transition experience. So we looked at the evidence. Here's the next cog in the Learning Health System framework. And so we did a scoping review on strategies to address ALC, and we didn't find anything in the peer-reviewed literature that focused on partnering with patients, caregivers, and providers to design service improvements. So there was a gap there that we wanted to fill. So we did some co-design work. I work and continue to work with a wonderful council of ALC patients who have had ALC experience along with their family members. We worked with various groups across the province. We engaged with lots of other patients and families across Ontario, different providers, different organizations. So we cast our net really, really wide. And we co-designed a communication guide for patients, caregivers, and providers, and also an intervention which was meant to be implemented in the hospital setting. So going to the implementation side, well, our work was included in the new practice standards for alternate level of care. So that's the LEAD practices guide. It was never implemented in a hospital setting. And this is where, in hindsight, I can see what happened. So the next, the feedback was this could have been maybe smaller scale to begin with, directly integrated into processes within maybe one hospital to start, and then scaled out afterwards. And also we didn't have a clear receptor for the co-design work we were doing. While initially it was part of a province-wide task group, that group dismantled over time, it was repurposed. So we sort of lost our policy link, and also we weren't firmly embedded in a setting with people that said, we want to implement what you have created. And so although it went into a practice guideline, it didn't actually change practice in the hospital because we cast our net a bit too wide. This is just to show it's ongoing. We had a much more intentional ongoing engagement strategy, which is in one setting, which is now leading to some tangible changes. So the co-design learnings here is to ensure that there's receptors for the work that you're doing. Who is invested? Who will implement the changes? Where possible, integrate changes and innovations into existing workflows, particularly if you're working within the healthcare system, and be really explicit and intentional about the goals and scope of the work, and maybe starting at a single site and scaling out after. I think I have one more slide. So some conclusions: relationship building is critical and ongoing. Honor the diversity of expertise and acknowledge the differences in decision-making power that people have, and help prepare them to have an equal voice at the table. Involve people impacted by the problem, as well as those that are invested in making the changes. and think long-term. So co-design is an opportunity to build capacity and a learning culture for the longer term. Wanted to say, check out our 2 webinars. We can put the links in the chat. We did these, we created these in partnership with patients, caregivers, and communities across several OHTs you may have attended on co-design. So it's about preparing for engagement and engagement methods. And I think we will take a pause there and move things along. So thank you.